Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, the big news is that there's a new Elixir case study that was published. It's for a company called Cyanview. And if you're like us, you're thinking, I've never heard of Cyanview. Like, what's the big deal? Well, it's really quite impressive. It's one of those really small companies that does a lot, and that's part of what makes it so impressive. And really, they're kind of invisible to most of us. Cyanview makes a remote control panel that is now used by specialist video operators on the Olympics, the Super Bowl, NFL, NBA, ESPN, Amazon, and many, many more. And even fashion shows in Paris apparently are using Cyanview's devices. So that's really cool. And a lot of what it comes down to is color trueness. And when you think of like fashion shows, that makes sense. You want the clothes and everything to be perfectly represented. We'll get more into the color shading feature that this has in a minute. But I just want to touch on that Cyanview is a small Belgian company that sells products for the live video broadcasting industry. And its primary focus is something called camera shading. So camera shading involves adjusting each camera to ensure they match up in color, exposure, and various other visual aspects. So the goal is to turn a live event. So this is all live, right? It's like everything has to be perfectly dialed in. And I never thought about this. Super Bowl, right? They've got so many different cameras and they're cutting all these different cameras, and the grass is all the same green, and the colors on the jerseys are all the same color, the same saturation, the levels, everything's the same. Because if it was different, you would notice that it was different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say, this camera is all set up different. And if you've ever done anything with hobby photography or professional photography and gotten into those cameras, there's so much there about how they can be tuned, especially when you're talking about live, right? And most of this stuff you fix in post-production, right? Like, I'll adjust the levels and I'll adjust the white balance and everything after the fact. But if it's live, it's all set up ahead of time and needing to be adjusted on the fly. So that's the problem they're solving, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
The fact that you would know if it was failing, but because things would not match, but like it's invisible to us because it works perfectly.
It's not just that, right? So I'm going to pull a quote from the case study. It says, during the Olympics in China, a studio in Beijing relied on a large number of Panasonic PTZ cameras. Most of their team, however, was based in Paris and needed to control the cameras remotely to run the various shows throughout the day. And so the problem is that Panasonic's cameras were never designed for internet use. So they required precise timing and multiple messages for every adjustment. And with network latency, that leads to timeouts, disconnects, other failures. So they ended up placing our devices next to the cameras in Beijing, controlled them over IP, Internet Protocol, from Paris, just as designed. So the devices in a given location communicate and coordinate on the network over a custom MQTT protocol, over 100 cameras without issue on a single remote control plane implemented on top of Elixir's /Erlang's, I added that part, network stack. All right, that's the end of the quote. That's incredibly complex and a lot of coordination and high stakes. That's crazy.
You really should check out the article because they also talk about some of the more technical aspects of, letting the Elixir supervision tree really shine, because you're talking to all these different camera equipment pieces and they have their own different firmware. And these companies aren't producing, here's a published way to talk to our equipment. So the team is having to reverse engineer all of this stuff. And so you'll have some equipment that's better supported than others, or the interaction protocol to talk to this particular device is a little shakier. So you have failures. A failure on one connection, or if the network connection gets dropped just between us and this one camera or this one piece of equipment, nothing else can break, right? So supervision trees to the rescue, keeps the whole system running. It comes back up and rejoins for the control, things like that. It's like, wow, it's impressive.
Yeah, that's a really cool story and use case. Like, I'm going to imagine that Cyanview considers like Elixir and Erlang like part of their secret sauce, right? Because this is a small team as well, small Belgian company.
Yes. And so I did want to highlight that, right? It's a small team of 3 people who built the product. And it was so powerful and effective that it spread across the industry purely on the strength of its functionality without any marketing. So Canon doesn't provide any of this type of professional level live event type of functionality. So they're like, use Cyanview. Just use them. Canon is suggesting that for their own equipment.
Yeah.
And so it's their reputation that has made that happen. And so now they are a team of 9, right? So they've grown over the years to 9 people. But like you consider when they're pulling off, it's like, man, that's small. That's a tiny team. It's just impressive. Yeah, so we just teased it. We just teased some of this stuff and hit some of the highlights that we felt were most fun and interesting. So definitely go check that out. It was Lars Vikman and Jose Valim who worked on that particular case study. So thanks for being able to dig up something incredible like that to share with the community.
Yeah. All right. Next up, Oban Pro 1.6 was released. And I think they're at time of recording, it's still the release candidates, but maybe it'll be released by the time you hear this. And I wanted to highlight this because there's a couple of features included in it that are really cool. So again, this is Oban Pro. This is the paid portion part of it. And so I know recently Oban sourced their Oban Web portion, which means that now Oban is open source and Oban Web is open source. So you generally have a really good like package altogether for durable jobs. A lot of people might be thinking, okay, well, what is Oban Pro going to give me then? Well, what is worth paying for? So this 1.6 release, I think, is worth paying for by itself. Some of the things included in Oban Pro are the ability to like chain jobs or have workflows or chunk jobs and batching things, like all that kind of stuff. And you might not really know what all that means. What's the difference between chaining and workflowing and chunking and batching? And like what's all the difference? And so Oban Pro 1.6 includes a new guide that really clearly explains like the use cases for each of these and how you can even mix them together. So that's really good. The guide is one thing, right? You could look at that without paying for Oban Pro. But the sub workflows in workflows is a killer feature of this release, I think. So imagining like I have an overall workflow, but I need to plug this other workflow into this workflow and then wait for that to be done before proceeding to the next thing. You can get a real complicated looking graph, structure of what needs to happen before jobs can execute or proceed, right? And that's where sub workflows can be really, really cool. So it ends up being a very composable way, now of defining complicated workflows. So that's included in this release. And then I'll mention one more thing is that the queue partitioning has been overhauled. What that means for you is that if you are partitioning your queues in the database, then here's a quote. It says, in a benchmark of 10,000 jobs spread across 20 partitions, so that's 200,000 jobs, processing took 17 seconds in 1.6, which was in 1.5, it took 360 seconds. Mm-hmm. Even though that's 20 partitions, it was also 20 times faster. So with far less load on the database. In other words, put simply, stuff got faster for free. Well, for Oban Pro, which is not free. As part of the release, you get it. You get a nice performance bump. Anyway, wanted to highlight that. That's Oban Pro 1.6. Sub workflows and workflows is the big deal. Rewritten guides is awesome in there. And then, of course, performance upgrades is always very, very helpful.
And next up, the Elixir package OpenID Connect has hit 1.0. The OpenID Connect library lives under Dockyard GitHub organization, but it's being maintained by TV Labs. So if you haven't heard of this library before, haven't used it, the GitHub project describes it as a client library for consuming and working with OpenID Connect providers, and that this library works with any OpenID Connect provider through a standard configuration map. So you just need to create a config map for each provider that you want to work with. And it has support already baked in for Google, Microsoft Azure, Auth0, Okta, AWS Cognito, Keycloak, OneLogin, and many others. So if you're looking for OpenID support in your app, I think like this is probably the go-to place and library for it. And they hit 1.0.
OpenID Connect, OpenID, any of this like SSO login stuff is always one of those things you don't want to hand roll. So this is this is a pretty critical, pretty good package to include. Next time your product folks are like, I want people to sign in with Microsoft, you're like, okay, great. estimate that it's going to take 1 month, put this package in, be done in less than a week, I'm sure, and then take a vacation for 3 weeks and you'll be good to go. Just kidding. All right, next up, Phoenix Test version 0.6 was released. So we got a link to a couple of the announcements. Some great changes in there. This one includes a breaking change, which is we love Phoenix Test here. The APIs and consolidating all of the different ways that Phoenix can be tested is really helpful and also an important library. One of the things that's changing in this is the way that you're querying things, right? It deprecates a couple of functions. It deprecates select with from. If you know what that means, then you got work to do. If you don't know what that means, then go check out Phoenix Test because it's worth including in your code base for easier testing of all the Phoenix things. And we've got a link to the change log as well for all the other things in there. Not included in this release, but just worth mentioning is there's a variety of kinds of tests you can run, right? Unit tests, you got integration tests, which is more of the stack, including the whole plug, cycle. And then you've got your end-to-end tests, like with driving a browser, actually rendering it and seeing things. Phoenix Test can handle all of that, now. Well, as much as that makes sense. Unit test, maybe not so much, but that's pretty incredible, right? There's another library out there that can help drive Playwright, and so worth checking out if you're pretty frustrated with all the different ways of testing against HTML output in your Phoenix app. Phoenix Test can help put that back together, at least to be more consistent. Anyway, Phoenix Test version 0.6 was released. Go check it out.
And next up, Supabase has released a new Postgres developer tool you'll want to know about. So Supabase, they really serve the JavaScript community, but they are Phoenix backend, right? And they have released several Elixir and Phoenix libraries. So this one is a general tool, open source for Postgres. So if you're using Postgres, then you may want to check this out because they created a Postgres Language Server and some other tools, which you can use in your IDE like VS Code, Cursor, NeoVim, and it gives you IntelliSense and autocomplete. And it's actually connecting to your database. So it can give you insight on your tables, your fields, and things like that, which is very neat. I thought, I'm going to give this a try. I want to do this. So yesterday I was like, all right, let me dig in. I'm excited. So there is a VS Code extension, which you can install. And then the VS Code extension has different features like download CLI, start the language server, stop the language server, things like that. But in order to get it working, you have to run the CLI with an init command because you have to create this special Postgres tools.json C file. It's defining the configuration and how to connect to your Postgres database. So unfortunately, it was not the easiest thing to set up and get going with. After about 30 minutes, I didn't get it working. Most of the documentation is all geared towards Mac OS, getting it running there, and I'm running Linux. So I think I know what I need to do, but I didn't get it working at this point yet. But there's another tool in here that I wanted to highlight as well. They have a website that's called pgtools.dev, and that includes a lot of the documentation for using both the extension, but also the CLI. And the CLI has a feature called linting migrations, which it can check your database migrations for problematic schema changes and encourage best practices. If you're thinking, I wonder if that could be used for CI, yes, it can. And they've already thought about, how can you bring this into an existing project? There's some config that you can put in to say, well, don't start checking and linting migrations until after this migration number, so that it doesn't, complain about your legacy ones that you already had in your project. So anyway, it's still pretty early, but they've made their first public release with it, and it looks really interesting. Just the idea of having a Postgres language server in the IDE that's hooked up to my database. Oh, that's an exciting beginning. I love that.
Yeah. And just to be clear, that migration stuff, I doubt that it's reading and parsing your Elixir AST, for the migrations happening with Ecto.
Yeah, that's a good point. From everything that I saw from their demo videos and everything, it only seems to be kicking in on a .sql file.
Mm-hmm, right. I don't know. Maybe there's a way here to have a plugin that, just off the cuff, like a pre-commit hook that would take these migrations, analyze the AST, and then run it through like an Ecto to SQL, on those queries or something that you're doing. That's probably not going to work. Now I think of it. These all these ecto migration things are a bunch of macros that have their own like commands underneath. I don't think it's as easy as to SQLing it. But anyway, I'm sure there's opportunity there. And or, you know what, maybe you just drop all the ecto migration macros and you just write your migrations in SQL.
Well, I love the idea of having a sigil SQL, right? Having a little sigil SQL, then you can say, oh, we're going to pull in and leverage some of this Postgres Language Server within that little chunk. Like that is not part of this, right? Just to be clear, that's not part of this, but it's like, ooh, is that a possibility? Is that somewhere we could go in the future?
Yeah, it could be really interesting. I'd love to, maybe I'll have to think about this a little bit more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like little traps that you can run into anyway when you use like ecto macros in migrations. Cause like, for example, if you want to add the null, if you want to make a column null, nullable or non-null, the modify macro right now will basically rewrite the column because it adds a little bit more SQL in there than is necessary. And so that causes Postgres to rewrite the column, so it kind of just does more than it needs to, because the problem is that it doesn't know what the starting point is, and so it has to do more to alter that column.
Oh, interesting.
And so the safe ecto migrations guide actually has a section on this, so it tells you what the safe way to do it with that won't rewrite the column there. And so like, anyway, you get into these kinds of things, and then the temptations of like doing these backfill or these task kind of things where, all right, I'm going to take all my users and add a timestamp to like modify a timestamp or something like that. So I'm going to use the user struct and then, query all of them and then do it in batches and stuff, but I'm still using the struct, and you can't do that in migrations because that struct can change over time. You're running that like that's a year-old, migration at this point, and the user is completely different now. And so now people trying to migrate from a fresh starting point will fail when we get to anyway. So like, maybe just using SQL all the time is the right choice. We'll see.
Yeah, we should probably drop in a link to the Safe Ecto Migrations resource as well, since we've mentioned this now.
Sure. All right. Well, moving on then. Last bit is that there's a community event resource at elixir-events.net that people might be interested in checking out. So we've mentioned it before. We're just revisiting it again. Again, that's elixir-events.net. Johanna Larson created the community resource for tracking and sharing and learning about, Elixir events. And you know what? She picked a great name. It's just called elixir-events.name. You can share conferences and meetups. You can filter by location. Elixir-events.net also has a Blue Sky account now, so you can follow that as well. Or maybe you'd rather do a RSS feed, whatever suits you better. So there are a number of Elixir meetups that we're aware of that are not listed on the site yet. So if you're running one of those meetups, it's really easy to add your event to elixir-events.net. So maybe go consider that. It's about discoverability, right? So that's one of the places that you can go get discovered. All right, well, that's it about elixir-events.net.
And that's it for the news. Today, we're being joined by our special guest, Michael Lubas of Paraxial.io. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on because you've been very active and involved in the Elixir community for some time, both contributing guides on security-focused things. I think you're involved with the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation Security Working Group.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I want to make sure I understand and others can understand what it is Paraxial.io is doing in terms of security and Elixir apps. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Michael Lubas. I'm the founder of Paraxial.io, which is the only security company really able to secure Elixir applications. I've been looking forward to this because a lot of Paraxial customers actually listen to this show. I publish a lot of content online. I do YouTube, social media, and I like the podcast format because people really engage with it more. You sort of focus on it. So that's why I'm looking forward to this. And I also think the work you're doing is really good. A lot of people listen and get their news this way related to Elixir.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you personally before we jump in too deep. Yeah, where is it that you live and where are you working?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm based out of New York. Everyone thinks I live in Denver because I'm an organizer for the Denver Elixir meetup, which is fully remote. I'm also an organizer for the New York meetup. So if you live in New York and you're looking for a local event, there's one coming up. I'm working on getting that organized. So keep an eye out for that. So my professional background is in software security. I've done that my whole career. It always interests me. And Paraxial came into being because there was this sort of classic problem where there's companies using Elixir, of course, that need security. The internet's a very hostile place. And there's security firms. It's a very big industry. There's these billion-dollar security companies. But it's this classic problem of the Elixir market is emerging and the security companies are set up to not go after that market, because who gets promoted at a big security company going after this small emerging market? Who are these Elixir people? Until suddenly, of course, the Fortune 500 is using Elixir and all of these brand names. So that's the kind of classic story of startups: is underserved market, emerging disruptive technology. Someone's going to emerge to fill that need. And that's how Paraxial got started. I just loved Elixir, working with it. It was always very interesting to me. That's how this conversation came to happen today, too. This was the first podcast I ever went on when I started the company. Before I even launched it, you reached out to me.
Yeah, that was back in episode 93, which was in April. Okay, so April 2022.
Wow, nice. 3 years, right?
Yeah. That was where we talked about preventing service abuse. Yeah, and you were mentioning just the security industry being big. And man, is it ever, right? Like the latest news I saw that everyone was talking about was Google's big acquisition of this company called Wiz for $32 billion. Like the biggest Google's biggest acquisition ever. So yeah, like it is a big business, and it is big because when something goes wrong, there's reputation damage. Unless you somehow, like, you're a credit reporting agency and you can lose all of your customers' data and still be in business. Like, I don't know how that works. But yeah, like for a lot of other companies, you really want to avoid any kind of breaches or anything like that. I want to talk about some of the stuff you've recently done. Like we talked about it on the news here. You did an Oban pen test with the release of Oban Web that Parker Selbert made free and open. Then you're like, hey, let's do a security audit of this. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And then you shared your results with Parker privately and any minor cleanups that were needed, and then shared a public release too. So things like that are just helpful for the community and give people greater confidence in the tools. So what's involved with doing a security audit of a library like that? The
Oban team, Parker and Shannon, they're just fantastic. You don't even have to take my word for it. Their reputation is stellar in Elixir. So I was so excited when they reached out to do that work. They were interested in improving the security of the whole product because they have major clients, major startups, billion-dollar companies and Fortune 500. So they really care about security, and it helps with the adoption. It helps them land customers. Mm-hmm. So the audit went very well. The statement was released stating that there were no critical findings, which I wasn't surprised by, really. Of course, on audits, it's very frustrating when you don't find something critical. Speaking from the perspective of the tester, I'll go through the whole thing. But at a high level, the goal is to find the security bugs. Pretty simple, the things that will get you hacked.
and it's really great when you can point to something like incredible. It's like, aha, see right here, like I've done my job, right? Just like you want to find those. Yes,
I've done those on tests and stood up in my office and pumped my fist and gone crazy. I've done that. I have absolutely done that after banging my head against the wall for 3 days, and that does happen. And that does happen on tests. That's the thing with the Oban team, though, is they're very sharp. They designed it in a very intelligent way to reduce the risk. And that's something that's hard to convey. Is I think sometimes people have this picture of security where it's just sort of a list of findings or something. But the design of the application as a whole, that is really important. So with Oban, what they did is they built the whole system where, let's say you're an Oban customer, you're, let's say, a healthcare provider. PII getting leaked is the end of the world. It's the worst thing that can happen in medical records. You're going to get fined. There's reputational damage, but you're probably going to suffer in a very big way. 23andMe had a data breach and is out of business. Now they're declaring bankruptcy. I know people will say, well, maybe it's not directly cause and effect, but it certainly didn't help their prospects as a business. So what Oban did is very smart. They do not require the user data to be sent to their server. So the Oban team can't see your medical records. It will only see the metadata of the of the job processing, which is really smart. There are a lot of solutions out there that require you, oh, you want to use this data processing solution. You have to send all of that PII to some server, and it's totally going to be fine if we raise a Series C. It's a big risk. So I think what they've done is really incredible, and an incredible boost to the community as well.
So we know that Elixir, is on our minds here, but are there other languages that you help cover as well?
Yeah, so the Rails support that Paraxial has now, that was a really big release. That was last year. I launched it right before Rails World in Canada. We went up to talk to the community there. And you can imagine there's a lot of overlap. A lot of people, I think, listening right now to this podcast have probably used Rails in some form or another. And the security problems are very close. So the list of security things that you need to do to secure an Elixir application, generally speaking, are the same as a Ruby app. Of course, there's differences in the language, but the best practices, such as having an inventory of your application, scanning for security problems, even when you define this is like going very deep. When you define a schema in Ecto and you say, let's only cast these certain values, that I believe was influenced by Rails and the mass assignment problems that they saw in Rails. So that was, by default, you could set is admin on your user schema way back. And then they changed that, I think, in Rails 3. It was forever ago.
Strong params.
Yes, exactly.
Having worked at multiple companies where it's common, I think, to have maybe Rails and Elixir, especially like if the company started with Rails and now they're growing into Elixir, then you still have two code bases.
Yeah, 100%.
Multiple products and stuff. Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense.
A big thing, like you're mentioning, like Ecto, right? Ecto's a big library, ubiquitous with most Elixir applications, and I'm thinking about now Ruby, and I'm thinking about Devise, ubiquitous, probably for a lot of applications. And I know there's always a lot of like squishiness about how you use those libraries, but how far do you go into like reviewing those libraries themselves too, to make sure that because that's where the meat is when it comes to like the sign-in form, allowing extra parameters being in, because those are typically devised templates, at least they start that way. But how far into these libraries do you go for review?
Yeah, during pen tests, for example, I like to read the source code of the libraries that they're using. I've also done that independently very early in Paraxial, or I think even before I started the company. I was curious how Phoenix works, so I wanted to see how does the whole back-end processing of the cookies work? Because Griffin, the original Soblo author, he reported a potential remote code execution. And I thought, and that's a really bad vulnerability, that remote code execution, meaning if Phoenix itself was vulnerable to this, and let's say details of that became public, somebody published on GitHub how to exploit it, everyone using Phoenix, if you had it exposed to the public internet and were running the vulnerable version, you could just get hacked immediately. Because people will plug that payload into their scanners and just scan the entire internet. And there's multiple people that do this to hack servers, to add them to their botnet, or to just get access. This is exactly what happened to Equifax. It was an Apache struts, which is the Java to struts. It's like Rails to Ruby and Elixir to Phoenix. So I went looking for this problem. And I found the code that Griffin was referencing and how it would have been a deserialization vulnerability, but it wouldn't have worked. Like the series of steps you would have to configure in your Phoenix app for this to actually be vulnerable, it just would never happen. And you can even read through the other libraries, because this was in 2017, I think. So if you read through, there's this new function called non-executable binary to term that Phoenix uses and then Plug uses, and you see it in like other Elixir code bases where it kind of permeated through the community. So the impression I always get when reading these libraries, it's very frustrating because they're usually secure. Well, frustrating for me, good for everybody that is listening to this, is that, Jose and the whole team just learned a lot and were very experienced. It feels to me that they absorbed all the security incidents and lessons of Rails over the years and just proactively coded against it.
That said, I would not be surprised how completely out of the way people go to introduce a vulnerability, even with those libraries.
That's where I see it. Yeah, that's usually the problem is, this is why I tell clients, if you're on the track of, let's say, using mix phxgen auth, you probably don't have any auth vulnerabilities. If you have decided to implement your own custom authorization logic, there's probably something there. That's what I'm going to look for on the test and usually find something.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. So then tell me a little bit about like, well, there's two things here. One of the things that I could review just as a person, Paraxial, you've written a blog post of like the Elixir and Phoenix security checklist, right? The 11 best practices. So I could go through that and I could kind of like self-audit myself and look for these little tips and tricks. We could talk about that, but then I also kind of want to know, you talked about Oban and the pen test you did, with them. What would be outside of those Elixir best practices that a pen test would include? Like what's the cream, included in that nice pie?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to summarize, it would be buying a book on woodworking from the bookstore versus maybe purchasing a completed piece from a professional craftsman. There's a gulf there. To get more into it. So Paraxial.io as a company makes software to automate this work. That's why businesses pay for it, to ensure they have access to this data, the scans are being run, developers are getting feedback on how to fix the vulnerabilities. That is one piece of the whole product suite that's offered. The pen test product is different. That's sort of a manual engagement. Companies that buy that, they want another layer. They want somebody to look at the design and think it through. The AI models are not quite there yet. I know that they have made some incredible advances in coding. I'm very impressed by it. But talking to a customer and really reasoning through it, they're not quite there yet. Even when they get there, I think customers will still want a human to be accountable for the decisions that go into the report. So the pen test is much more of a manual engagement. Those are kind of the two pieces of it.
So you've written like automated tests, right? Like that's the software that folks would be paying for with Paraxial.
Quite a few parts, but yeah, automated tests is a big part.
Right. Acting like a white hat hacker at this point, right? I imagine that you have some software that's trying to break their site. That's obviously not included in the Elixir and Phoenix security checklist. The self-auditing part of this, I guess. One of the first things I do in a fresh app that I deploy somewhere that has exception reporting turned on. Because like you said, like there are people out there that are just scanning open ports out there. And of course, constantly. This is open to the internet. And I get all of these random hits on wp-admin/log, all these things.
That's a Paraxial feature to block those.
Okay. Oh, well then, yeah, that's a good one. But yeah, that's like one of those things that I get is like, I don't have this route handled and I'm using Bandit, which doesn't have all these like 404s. The exception libraries don't have the defaults yet to ignore stuff like this for Bandit yet. Or at least at the time, maybe they do now. So that was one thing. It's like, okay, I'm getting too much like just junk in my exception reporter. Sentry is very happy about that, but
do they pay? Do you pay per error to them?
Right. Yeah. Or there's thresholds at least, right? I guess maybe something that you can tell me more about is like, what are some of those kind of like white hat hacker kind of approaches that you take? What are some of like generically? What are some of the things that you're pen testing?
Yeah, for pen testing, I would say, for example, if you scan your application for remote code execution, you might get some results saying, oh, you're using these dangerous functions. And it might even say, oh, user input could be passed there. I would say the big one today is that automated tools don't have business context. And I think this will change in the future. But today, right now, if you need to get a sense of, hey, is this application going to get hacked when we deploy it on the public internet? That's what all of this comes down to. Sometimes I think people overcomplicate cybersecurity a little bit, because if you go to a board meeting, the big question is, hey, are we going to get hacked when this goes live? That's really what it comes down to. And what you want is somebody that will tell you, yes, you have these outstanding findings, you're using these vulnerable functions, or you're on this, and they're like, okay, the technical details, I don't care what an EKS group is. What I think is helpful about a pen test report is somebody to translate that language into the language of your business. You're a healthcare company. hey, don't deploy this code. You will get hacked immediately, like somebody to tell you that, and this is why. Or, yeah, you have these findings, but the probability of this actually becoming an incident is 0 because of the incredible steps that would take place. Or in some cases, it's even, hey, you have these outstanding findings. Let's say your HTTP headers are not set. These are not real security problems, but potential clients are going to plug in your URL to this security headers scanner page, and then they're going to give you an F, and they're going to try to use that to get a discount on the deal or something. So put those headers on. It won't actually really change the real security of your application, but you've hired me to assess it, and I want to give you this context. So that's that kind of communication is where the pen test really goes well with the clients I work for. It's more about helping them in their business than showing off or something.
Gotcha. And then none of it matters anyway, because as a customer relations, person or whoever, somebody in the parking lot picks up a USB stick and plugs it into their work computer.
I would say it matters. It matters more than you'd think, because there's this sense, I've seen this at places where I've been involved very early in my career, where you'll meet security people that will be obsessed about things like that, like the social engineering training. And I was very much in the camp of, hey guys, we have this web application. It's vulnerable right now. Anybody in the world can scan it and hack into it. This seems even higher probability than that, because how many people are running USB stick malware operations? There's not that many people. There's people in the world that do it, but it's very small groups that are very, very well funded. How many people can scan your web server and hack it? Anybody that knows how to code. That is a real threat, but there's these gulfs of problems that it can be difficult to communicate unless you're really obsessive or in it too far, maybe.
Well, it's true, right? You think the automated scanners are just like, they're not even looking at necessarily a particular website. Like
exactly,
this business, they're just doing like IP ranges, right? Just, I'm looking for any server that has this software because I know there's a vulnerability with it. If I can tell what version they're running, maybe from headers, or just I can do a little poke and find out. Like, that's the whole world that could be hitting at that door.
And you know what's sad too is there's that, and then there's people. There was this recent meme, everyone was texting me about it, where somebody. The term is vibe coding, or you're coding with an LLM, and it was 1 or 2 people had their websites hacked. And what I thought was interesting in those cases was it seemed that they weren't hit by one of those scanners you mentioned. It seems that people read, "Oh, you're coding with an LLM. I hate you. I'm going to hack your website because it's easy and funny." And
yes,
I don't agree. I personally don't agree with that. I think that. And, the cynical take is, well, oh, you own a security company and you sell security. Like, shouldn't you be like dancing for joy but I think that's very bad. I think it's very cruel to do that to somebody. Yeah. I would like to help people code things and put them on the internet and not get attacked. I actually really enjoy that line of work.
With that particular one, my take on that was, the idea of vibe coding is you can take someone who has 0 or very little programming experience, and they're now building something because the AI is doing all the work. And so it can be existentially threatening to us software developers, right? So you see someone put something up like that, and yes, it wasn't securely done. Maybe you have mass assignment type of stuff, and you're like, oh, I can become admin, I can do this. And yeah, so then people were just like wanting to knock it down.
Mess with, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. With the whole AI thing, I don't know what's going to happen. So we'll save that topic for another time.
I think that's a good take, actually. It's very honest.
But I did want to get a little bit more into something else I saw on your blog. In February 2025, so just a little bit ago, you posted about Paraxial version 3. Then I thought, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, so you're talking about this software. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about the software that you offer. You're saying, oh, I have something that can actually, it sounds like it can detect and stop like those common like WordPress login things. Like, what is that you're talking about? And then there's also like a CI/CD side. So maybe you can kind of help me put it together in my mind of what it is that Paraxial, the software.
Yeah, version 3 was this major release. And some of the big features that people really cared about were Phoenix Live View support. A lot of people had asked about that. A lot of people have problems with WordPress bots, people scanning for .php to compromise their application. So it's this culmination of, I think, over a year of development work. So I was really excited to get it live and into customers. It's available now too. Anybody listening to this podcast can sign up for a free account actually to get started and see all the features. I would say, to really summarize, it's all of the security problems you will most likely see as an Elixir developer. There's probably a tool in the toolbox for you to deal with it. Introducing a remote code execution through a vulnerability. You don't want to be logging into the security software every day. I understand that. So there's a GitHub and a GitLab app. You might have vulnerable dependencies that you want to be scanning for, because I was very surprised by this. GitHub appears to support Elixir in Dependabot, because if you have an Elixir project, you will get Dependabot bumps. Yep. But because Elixir is not supported in some GitHub thing, it won't alert you on vulnerabilities in Elixir dependencies, which I was very surprised by. Wow. So that's a small PSA I have, is don't rely on Dependabot if it's security critical.
I was looking at your Paraxial website and I scrolled down and there's like a CI/CD and GitHub integration. And you're showing, like, what you'd mentioned was, like, if you're using Erlang binary to term, that it will catch it and suggest the alternative. And you'd mentioned that, the one that's being currently recommended is the plug crypto non-executable binary to term, which honestly, you mentioned it and like, that's been finding its way throughout the community. I hadn't actually heard that one. So I'd always heard, binary to existing term. Now I'm seeing, there's this other non-executable binary to terms. Like, that's a different level. That's interesting. What I'm seeing from this is, okay, so I can hook some of your Paraxial software into the GitHub CI/CD. How does that work? What is that doing? Is that running audits, or is that part of my GitHub check-in checklist and it will add findings? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So this is a very commonly requested feature where I'll show this to a customer and they'll say, okay, this is great. You're checking the source code for vulnerabilities. You're checking the dependencies. You're checking if we're using software licenses that we're not allowed to. But I want to not have this check once a quarter for my SOC 2 or ISO compliance. We would like to have this on every new code change. So with Paraxial, if you're using it with the GitHub app, when you open a pull request, it will scan for that binary to term example or SQL injection. And then you will get a comment saying, yes, there was one reported finding in the CI/CD run. Here's what you did. Here's how you verify and go through it. Here's how you fix it. Also, here's what SQL injection is in Ecto. And I link to a Paraxial blog post where I kind of walk it through. So it's nice. I think people like not getting generic advice where it's, here's SQL injection in a PHP app from 20 years ago. It's in Elixir and Ecto, and people seem to really resonate with that. So in addition to those scans taking place, a feature management really likes, and even developers really like this, is you can receive a weekly email showing, okay, in your organization, you have 3 Elixir applications. Of those 3, only one is exposed to the public internet and handles customer information. All of those have received their security scans this week. There are 0 reported findings, or there's a critical finding, and you need to be aware of that. Or the scan didn't run for some reason, and that needs to be resolved before the audit is coming up. This has been a process of iteration, discovering customer needs and the features people want. And it's been quite a journey, and it's very cool to be talking about it now because it seems so cohesive and obvious after 3 years of work.
So I have a better idea now about the CI/CD, the code checks. That totally makes sense. You want that happening as code changes happen. It's always better when the CI/CD check can tell the developer what's wrong and they have some education learning at the same time. It's less embarrassing, for the developer. They can just resolve it. But you also mentioned that it's able to deal with these WordPress URLs. Presumably that's something like in plug in my router. What is that? What's happening there?
Oh yeah, that's correct. So Paraxial as a software platform, there's sort of 2 distinct products. One is application secure, And that deals with the code scanning for vulnerabilities. It can actually scan your web server for open ports now. The libraries you have, that kind of application inventory and the regular scanning. There's also the bot defense feature, which was the original release, I think back from way back, like the first episode we did, we were talking about this. And a common problem people have is a bot will be scanning for .php and WordPress, and like David said, that could be triggering your Sentry error. So you're just getting blown up and it's just very annoying, and you'd prefer to just ban these bots and not have to deal with it. So that's a new plug that comes with Paraxial. You can just really put it in your endpoint right before the router. It'll just block the PHP bots. You don't have to deal with it. Another really nice feature that people have been using is writing their own custom plugs. So let's say you've maybe seen this bot attack that's targeted at your organization, and they're scanning for some very specific thing, and you're thinking, oh, if I could just reach into the con and pattern match on a string, if I see this string, I know I just want to ban that. You can do that in about 10 minutes with Paraxial. It's right in the Elixir code. You don't have to go into Docker or your Nginx config. It's all in your Elixir code, and people have really liked that feature and responded well to it.
So I know that some traditional, I say traditional, I know these are probably the most common ones. Like there's other tools out there that are like more up the stack, right? Like I can think of, it doesn't have to be enterprise, but Cloudflare is a typical solution for this kind of stuff as well, for blocking, common botnet traffic like that. But another one is something that's typically on infrastructure is something like fail to ban or CrowdSec, I think is one of them, where it's the squishier kinds of security issues, not just like based on a route, being open. These are essentially like layers in between in the request path to your app. And so if I'm understanding like Paraxial, you're saying that you ship a plug. So that's inside of my app at this point.
Yeah, correct.
Are there any upstream tools that Paraxial is offering here, and if not, or if so, like how would they compare to other solutions like Fail to Ban or CrowdSec and things like that, or Cloudflare?
Yeah, it's hard because they're all so different. I would say the major benefit of Paraxial is you don't have to worry about compatibility with your stack. So how do you install this enterprise software? Will it be compatible? I've installed enterprise software professionally before, and I'm sure people listening to this have too. And I always wanted to just make a code change because it was something that was being done regularly. Most organizations they make code changes pretty frequently. And I also liked having that context in the code base. It never made sense to me personally, where let's say you have a banking or a healthcare portal where the security of that application is now completely dependent on the cloud implementation when you might move. Like I've also seen companies do that. And I get that, this is a debate on the infrastructure or the code part. But I would say in terms of Paraxial, the plug method, people like it because it's also 100% compatible with any other enterprise software. If you want to have something in front of the application completely, that's 100% compatible. Like you don't have to worry about it, because if your Elixir code is running, Paraxial is going to work in that environment. I would say that in terms of upstream offerings, the network scan feature of Paraxial, that has been well received because it's not a component that's in the plug. So the way that works is it's a port scan, and it also queries your SSH settings. So let's say you have your application on the public internet and you're hosted on a cloud provider, and you've decided to install the database on your web server and open the database management port to the public internet or the Docker management port. Don't do this. But this has happened. There are numerous security incidents that have occurred because of this. What Paraxial can do now is every single day or week scan your application and tell you, okay, this looks good. You don't have SSH or Docker or MySQL exposed to the public internet. It's only 80 and 443. Or you do have SSH exposed. Let's say that there are situations where that's just a requirement, but it's only public key auth. You don't have the password auth enabled. So there's no risk of you accidentally setting a weak password there. In summary, I would say that the enterprise security providers have built a solution for the enterprise, and Paraxial has built a solution targeted at the Elixir developer company using Elixir. Mm-hmm. Have you guys read this book, The Innovator's Dilemma?
Yes.
Oh, so you know it. Okay. So you probably know where I'm going with this. It's a great book. I recommend reading it, even if you're not interested in business. I think if you're a technical person listening, it's a great book, The Innovator's Dilemma.
Yep. Clayton Christensen. Excellent.
Yeah.
I'll leave a link to it.
Exactly. And he talks about how do you study disruptive innovation? And the example he gives is the hard disk industry, because the technology would advance so quickly, the firms would fail because they couldn't keep up with the change of pace. And an example from the book is, let's say you're a hard drive manufacturer. I'm going to just deviate a little bit. Don't fact check me on this, but let's say you're a hard disk manufacturer in 1985 and you've got your market segment that you're really serving very well. They're buying millions of dollars per order. And there's technology that comes out where the hard disk can get smaller and is cheaper, but it doesn't store as much. And absolutely none of your current customers want to buy this thing. And your entire business organization is set up where people only get excited about a deal that is over $2 million. If it's less than that, why bother? No one's going to get promoted. Doesn't matter. But then what happens is new organizations emerge that get extremely motivated by a deal that is less than $2 million. And they pursue those markets very aggressively. And, oh, the market for a smaller hard disk, maybe there's 20 companies or 50 companies that would buy something like this. And you can probably see where I'm going with this, where like, what's the market for Elixir security software? Nobody at one of these big enterprise firms care about that market. Well, there's somebody that does on this podcast, and I've had a great time pursuing it and I love it. So that's why I love the book so much, is I felt like it's crazy because the book was written years and years ago, but it felt so applicable to like the current moment in my life. I was like, this is amazing.
Just to finish out your example with the hard drive thing, right? Like the idea is it's considered an inferior product. It's smaller. It doesn't meet the needs of these big businesses, but then it continues to get better and better and better. At some point it reaches that threshold where it does enough for the other customers. And then all of a sudden, the whole customer base that, were your customers all switch or start switching en masse, to this other alternative. From your perspective, came out of nowhere. So it's a great book. Totally recommend it.
Yeah. If you're listening to this podcast, I can tell you the enterprise security firms will give you the cold shoulder and act annoyed at you. If you contact me, I'm thrilled to talk to you. I would love to hear about your security problems. Let's go. I'll work with you. And I think that's what's been so great about this whole process.
Yeah. Before we close, I just had a little bit of a question, I guess, on security audits. I've never been through a security audit myself. I've been at plenty of companies. I've been at fintech, it's financial tech and ed tech and education. And both of those have a lot of requirements about compliance or audits. And, SOC, you have different things you have to demonstrate that you're doing. In education, you can even have laws about how student data has to be protected and things like that. So I've been in those types of companies, and I've never personally been involved in a security audit. And I'm just curious what that's like. How do you approach this? I imagine, first you're just like, hey, we're just going to run some automated tools and see low-hanging fruit and find stuff that way. But then what does it go beyond that? What's that like?
Yeah, this is a good question. Are you more interested in an audit from the perspective of finding security issues, or more of a SOC 2 ISO compliance?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know enough to know the difference.
Well, this is a good point. Yeah, because this is a misconception. I think people will often think that a SOC 2 audit means that a hacker is going to show up and laugh at your poor security. SOC 2 audits are actually run by this organization of accounting firms. And it's become this kind of framework for securing an organization, but it's not 100% technical.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of organization controls related to onboarding and policy and things like that.
A lot of process,
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, there are security items you can do that will not only reduce the risk of a hack, but will also fulfill these compliance requirements. So there's this one meme that I don't like, where people will say like a SOC 2 audit has nothing to do with security. It's completely different. And it's very cynical. I think if you don't have automated vulnerability scanning set up and you don't have a process for fixing vulnerabilities, you probably should. Like, that's a good thing to have if you're a security sensitive company. The SOC 2 audit is the great time to do it. The organization itself will be motivated to complete it because it'll lead to more sales and deals and allow growth. So it's just this perfect storm. If you can just not have a cynical attitude about it, I think it's a really good opportunity. So by the time this episode comes out, I'll have this up on the Paraxial blog, and it's key controls that you can use Paraxial to fulfill with a SOC 2 or an ISO audit. So for example, monitoring changes for new vulnerabilities. How do we do that? Paraxial is a really great way to automate that. And it will also reduce the risk of an incident. So I started the whole company with the idea of stopping hackers because that's just what's interesting to me inherently. And then I've also learned that it overlaps in this way with this compliance framework. I was never particularly passionate. Paraxial is not a SOC 2 ISO compliance company. Those exist. But I am really interested in how do you stop the hack from happening? And if you can overlap that and kind of get multiple wins, from a technical perspective and an engineering perspective, but also from a sales, public relations, you should really seize the opportunity when it comes up. In summary, if you are going to undergo ISO, SOC 2, HIPAA compliance, it can be a struggle. I'm not going to say that it's all rainbows or whatever, but if you can use it to also improve your security at the same time and sort of view it with a positive attitude, I think that is the right way to look at it. At the same time, it will be frustrating if the tools you have just don't work with your stack. I'm sure there's people that be like, oh, we have like a SOC 2 audit. Let's buy a code scanner that didn't have Elixir support. Like, I'm certain that has probably happened.
Yeah.
Out there, just because there can be miscommunications with teams. So if you're an Elixir developer and you can talk to your security team, make sure that we have Elixir support. Like, your life will probably improve too, because I talk to people that are very frustrated with the security tooling at their org because they're subject to it. They have to meet the SLAs and they just go, hey, this doesn't support Elixir. I feel like I'm in this Kafka-esque problem that I have to navigate. So if I can help with that, I'm very grateful and I would like to.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but if people want to get in touch with you, maybe they want to follow you online or reach out to learn more about some of the specifics we were talking about, where should they go to do that?
Yeah, so Paraxial's on Blue Sky now. There's a lot of Elixir people there. It's also on X. There's on GitHub. There's the YouTube account. If you need to get in contact with me, you can email me. My email is michael@Paraxial.io. I'm also on LinkedIn. Don't be shy. If you're listening to this, I'd like to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, for coming on and helping me get my head more around what's going on with both the Paraxial services, but just how it fits in with security, how it fits in with compliance, and how there's overlap, but not necessarily the same thing. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.